One comment just flipped the entire WNBA conversation upside down. When Patrick Bet-David went on camera and called out Angel Reese by name, it wasn't subtle. He didn't hedge. He didn't soften it. He said what many fans have been debating quietly, that Caitlin Clark is the reason the league suddenly has real leverage in these CBA negotiations. And the timing, almost cinematic. While Reese was on live stream discussing the possibility of sitting out 2026, Clark was on NBC, calm and composed, saying she feels confident a deal will get done. No threats, no ultimatums, just confidence. That contrast is what lit the fire. This isn't just about salaries anymore. It's about influence. It's about who truly moved the needle. And it's about whether threatening to sit out strengthens the league or risks the very momentum that made this negotiation possible in the first place. And that's where this story really begins. The moment everything shifted wasn't a press release. It wasn't a leaked number. It was a live stream. When Angel Reese casually floated the idea of players potentially sitting out the 2026 season, the internet didn't just react, it split. Some saw it as strength, others saw it as reckless. But either way, it changed the temperature of the entire CBA conversation overnight. Because here's the reality: strike talk hits differently when the league is finally experiencing growth. The WNBA isn't negotiating from the same place it was 5 years ago. Attendance is up, TV ratings are up, sponsorship buzz is louder than it's ever been, expansion teams are on the horizon, momentum feels real. So when the possibility of sitting out gets introduced into that environment, it doesn't sound like routine labor leverage. It sounds like a gamble. Now, to be clear, players in every major league have used strike threats as negotiation tools. It's not new. The NBA did it. The NFL did it. MLB did it. Labor disputes are part of professional sports history. But context matters. Those leagues were negotiating over multi-billion-dollar revenue machines when they walked away from games. The WNBA, according to various financial reports over the years, has historically operated at a loss. That makes the risk calculation different. And timing matters even more. This moment of growth is fragile. Many analysts attribute much of the recent surge in attention to Caitlin Clark and the wave of new fans she brought with her from college. Whether you believe she's the sole reason or simply a major catalyst, the numbers show a spike in interest aligned with her arrival. That's why strike language feels explosive right now. Because from a fan's perspective, it sounds like threatening to shut down a momentum engine that's still warming up. Supporters of the union argue it's precisely the right time to push. If revenue is rising, players want a larger share. That's basic negotiation logic, and they're not wrong for wanting fair compensation in a growing league. But critics argue something else entirely. They're asking, is threatening to sit out strengthening the player's position or risking public goodwill at the exact moment the league needs stability? That's the tension, and it's amplified by contrast. While Reese's live stream comments spread online, Clark was sitting on a national NBC broadcast expressing confidence that a deal would get done. Calm, measured, optimistic, no ultimatums. That contrast created a narrative whether anyone intended it or not. One image suggested pressure. The other suggested patience. And in labor negotiations, perception can be just as powerful as numbers. The strike comment didn't end negotiations. It didn't derail anything officially, but it shifted public opinion. It gave critics something tangible to point at. It forced fans to start choosing sides. And once fans start choosing sides in a labor dispute, the conversation stops being about percentages and starts being about trust. That's when everything changes. While the noise was getting louder online, something very different was happening on national television. Caitlin Clark sat down on NBC's NBA coverage, not as a headline, not as controversy, but as an analyst. Calm, comfortable, completely in control of the moment. And that mattered more than people realized. Because this wasn't just a media appearance, it was positioning. In the middle of CBA tension, strike talk, and union drama, Clark walked onto one of the biggest basketball platforms in the country and talked about growth. She talked about opportunity. She talked about how far the league has come and how much further it can go. No ultimatums, no public pressure tactics, just confidence. When asked about negotiations, she didn't escalate anything. She didn't criticize ownership. She didn't rally fans against players. She simply said she felt confident a deal would get done. That's it. And that simplicity was powerful. From a business standpoint, the optics were crystal clear. Sponsors watching saw stability. Networks watching saw marketability. Executives watching saw someone who can cross platforms effortlessly, from college phenomenon to WNBA rookie to national NBA analyst desk, without missing a beat. That's star power. And here's the part that makes this moment strategic. She didn't make it about herself. Clark focused on the product, on attendance growth, on TV numbers, on expansion teams, on the future. She framed the WNBA as something ascending, something worth investing in, something worth protecting. That tone contrasted sharply with the strike conversations circulating elsewhere. Now, to be fair, optimism doesn't resolve contract disputes. Confidence doesn't replace negotiation leverage, but perception influences momentum. And in that NBC segment, Clark sent a subtle but unmistakable signal. The season matters, the growth matters, the momentum matters. For viewers who are newer to the league, many of whom came in during Clark's final college run, that segment reinforced something important. The WNBA isn't chaos, it isn't unstable, it's evolving. And evolution feels safer than confrontation. That's why her appearance resonated beyond basketball fans. It reached casual viewers who might not understand revenue splits or salary caps, but understand tone. One player was talking about sitting out. Another was talking about building up. Whether intentional or not, that contrast became the story. And here's what makes it even more significant. Clark didn't look overwhelmed by the spotlight. She looked like she belonged there. That's not common for a second-year pro. It suggests longevity. It suggests crossover appeal. It suggests someone who can represent the league not just on the court, but in boardrooms, broadcast booths, and sponsorship meetings. In labor disputes, leverage usually comes from withholding labor. But brand leverage, that comes from influence. And that NBC moment reminded everyone watching that Clark's influence extends far beyond a box score. Which raises the real question. In a league negotiating its financial future, how much does marketability weigh against militancy? Because sometimes the quietest voice in the room carries the most weight. Forget opinions for a second, let's talk numbers. When Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, something measurable happened. Not hype, not narrative, actual data shifted. League attendance jumped significantly year over year. Some reports showed increases approaching 40–50% compared to the previous season. That's not a small bump, that's a surge. Arenas that previously averaged modest crowds suddenly saw sellouts, not just in Indiana, but on the road. Teams were moving games to larger venues when Clark came to town. And it wasn't just tickets. Television ratings spiked. National broadcasts featuring Clark consistently pulled in over 1 million viewers, with certain matchups climbing even higher. For context, that kind of jump in viewership isn't subtle. It signals appointment television, something advertisers pay attention to immediately. Merchandise, that exploded too. Jersey sales, team gear, and league-branded products saw dramatic increases. Some analysts pointed to triple-digit percentage growth in specific categories. Again, not incremental growth, exponential attention. Now, to be clear, Clark didn't build the league alone. The WNBA has been steadily growing talent depth and competitive balance for years. Stars like Angel Wilson and others helped elevate the level of play long before Clark arrived. But what Clark brought was something different. She brought crossover gravity. College fans followed her. Casual sports fans followed her. Media outlets that previously gave the league minimal coverage suddenly allocated prime slots. That ripple effect is what many commentators refer to as the Clark effect. And perception matters just as much as production. When a league trends nationally, sponsors take meetings. When ratings spike, networks renegotiate. When merchandise flies off shelves, investment conversations accelerate. That timing is critical. Because the current collective bargaining negotiations aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening during a period of visibility the league hasn't experienced at this scale before. That visibility creates leverage, but it also creates vulnerability. If growth is closely tied, fairly or unfairly, to one player's market draw, critics argue that the league's momentum could be fragile. Supporters counter that this surge is a sign of long-term sustainability finally arriving. Both sides use the same numbers to make different points. One side says, revenue is up, players deserve a bigger share. The other says, revenue is up, but the league still isn't the NFL or NBA. Be careful not to outpace stability. That's the tension inside the data. And that's why Patrick Bet-David's comments landed the way they did. When he suggested Clark is keeping the league afloat, he was echoing a sentiment tied to visible growth trends, even if that framing oversimplifies the broader picture. Because while the numbers clearly rose during Clark's arrival, no single athlete carries an entire professional league alone. Momentum is complex, branding is layered, growth is collaborative. But influence is measurable. And right now, the numbers show something undeniable. Since Clark stepped into the league spotlight, attention, attendance, and conversation have all accelerated. The real question is whether the growth happened. It's whether the league can protect it. Here, where the story stops being about personalities and starts being about credibility. In the middle of these high-stakes CBA talks, the Women's National Basketball Players Association publicly stated that ownership showed up to a key bargaining session without a proposal ready. That framing spread fast. It painted a clear picture: owners weren't serious. And at first, fans bought it. Because if you're negotiating the biggest labor deal in league history and one side shows up empty-handed, that sounds like disrespect. It sounds like delay tactics. It sounds like bad faith. But then reports surfaced suggesting there was a proposal discussed, including figures tied to a rising salary cap, increased max contracts, and expanded benefits over the life of the deal. The numbers reportedly started lower than what the union wants, but they were real. That's where the narrative cracked. Now, instead of no offer, the conversation shifted to massive gap. And those are two very different stories. A gap is normal in negotiations. Every major league has them. Owners propose one figure, players counter with another. The middle ground is where deals are made. But saying there was nothing when there were actual numbers in discussion, that's where trust becomes fragile. To be fair, union leaders may have felt the proposal wasn't serious enough to count. In negotiation language, sometimes an opening offer can feel symbolic rather than substantial. But publicly declaring there was no proposal at all, when reports later indicated otherwise, created doubt. And doubt spreads quickly online. Then another wrinkle appeared. Some executive committee members reportedly joined that meeting virtually rather than attending in person. Now, that doesn't automatically mean bad faith. Travel conflicts happen, scheduling is complex, but optics matter in billion-dollar negotiations. When one side is physically present and the other appears partially remote, critics frame it as imbalance, whether fair or not. And that's the recurring theme here. Optics. Because while the owners didn't immediately issue a formal written counter after that session, they had already presented numbers. The union framed the session as empty. Observers saw a disconnect. And in a labor dispute, public support is currency. Fans who were initially ready to back the players began asking harder questions, not about whether players deserve raises, most agree they do, but about transparency. Are both sides communicating clearly? Are messages aligned with reality? Is this strategic pressure or public spin? Negotiations are always tense. That's not unusual. What made this moment explosive was the public narrative conflict layered on top of financial disagreement. Instead of a quiet back and forth in boardrooms, the dispute spilled into headlines. And once that happens, it stops being just a numbers game. It becomes a perception battle. One side wants a larger revenue share, the other warns about sustainability, both claim good faith. But if fans begin to feel misled, even slightly, that sympathy advantage evaporates fast. The real issue is whether there's a gap. Every CBA has one. The real issue is this. When trust starts slipping, negotiations get harder. And right now, the biggest fight isn't over percentages. It's over credibility. Now this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because beyond the salary cap numbers, beyond the strike talk, there's another layer that fans online keep bringing up. And to be clear, what we're about to discuss falls into the category of speculation. No formal wrongdoing has been proven. No official investigation has confirmed misconduct, but perception alone can shape public opinion. The focus of that perception, the off-season league called Unrivaled, co-founded by Nafisa Collier and Brina Stewart. Unrivaled is a separate 3-on-3 league designed to give WNBA players an opportunity to earn income during the off-season without going overseas. On paper, that sounds positive, keeping talent domestic, creating additional revenue streams, and building the women's basketball ecosystem. But here, where some fans started connecting dots. Unrivaled's business model depends, at least in part, on players seeking additional off-season income. And the WNBA's CBA negotiations are centered on dramatically increasing player salaries. So online critics have asked, if WNBA salaries rise significantly, would that reduce players' need to participate in off-season leagues? And if that happened, would it indirectly affect Unrivaled's long-term growth? Again, this is speculation circulating among fans and commentators. There has been no official statement indicating that Collier or Stewart are acting in self-interest during negotiations. Both have publicly positioned themselves as advocating for all players. But perception doesn't wait for proof. When executive committee members of the Players Association are also business owners in a separate basketball venture, even the appearance of overlap invites scrutiny, especially during tense negotiations. And in high-profile labor disputes, optics are everything. Some critics online have argued that pushing negotiations toward a harder stance could increase pressure on the league, while simultaneously keeping off-season earning opportunities attractive. Others strongly reject that framing, saying it unfairly questions players' integrity and distracts from legitimate labor goals. That's the divide. On one side, players deserve maximum leverage and fair compensation. On the other, is there a secondary financial layer influencing strategy? The truth likely isn't as simple as either extreme. Professional athletes are allowed to build businesses, they're allowed to invest, they're allowed to create new leagues. That's entrepreneurship. But when those same athletes also sit at the negotiation table shaping a CBA that could impact their external ventures, scrutiny becomes inevitable. And scrutiny doesn't require proof to gain traction. It only requires timing. Right now, negotiations are tense, public trust is fragile, fans are polarized, so even rumors gain oxygen quickly. The larger issue, is whether there's an actual conflict of interest. It's whether the perception of one weakens public confidence in the negotiation process. Because once fans begin questioning motives, fairly or unfairly, the conversation shifts from fairness to suspicion. And suspicion is much harder to negotiate than numbers. Here, where things really shifted. It wasn't an official press conference, it wasn't a leaked document, it was the comment sections. Once strike talk, negotiation drama, and public contradictions started circulating, fans didn't stay neutral. They picked sides. And online, that shift has been loud. Under posts from Angel Reese, replies started changing tone. Under union statements, skepticism increased. And under clips of Caitlin Clark calmly discussing growth and confidence, engagement skyrocketed. Now, to be fair, social media isn't a scientific poll. Algorithms amplify extremes. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. But perception shapes momentum, and right now the perception battle is intense. Many newer fans, especially those who began following the WNBA during Clark's record-breaking college run, feel protective of the league's current growth. They saw attendance rise, they saw sellouts, they saw television ratings climb. To them, the league finally feels mainstream. So when conversations shift toward potentially sitting out 2026, it doesn't feel strategic, it feels risky. On the other side, longtime supporters argue that labor leverage is necessary precisely because the league is growing. They believe players shouldn't wait to demand better revenue sharing while visibility is high. That's the divide. But here's the part that escalated things. Fans began revisiting past moments. Old clips resurfaced, physical plays from Clark's rookie season, comments about earning respect, debates about fan bases and media coverage. The internet doesn't forget, and in a polarized environment, receipts reappear fast. Some fans began framing the situation as hypocrisy. They argue that certain veterans criticized Clark's spotlight, yet now benefit from the increased attention she brought. Others push back hard on that idea, saying growth is collective and shouldn't be credited to one player alone. Again, two completely different interpretations of the same events. What makes this backlash unique is that it's not centered on salary numbers. It's emotional, it's narrative-driven. Fans aren't arguing about whether max contracts should rise from one figure to another. They're arguing about ownership of momentum. Who built it, who benefits from it, who's protecting it. That's why Patrick Bet-David's comments resonated so strongly online. He didn't introduce a new argument. He vocalized one that was already simmering in comment sections. And once mainstream personalities echo online sentiment, that sentiment feels validated. Now players are facing something complicated: public opinion during negotiation season. Because in labor disputes, sympathy can strengthen leverage, but backlash can weaken it. If fans begin viewing union leadership as confrontational rather than constructive, support shifts. And when public support shifts, media framing shifts. And when media framing shifts, negotiation pressure changes. That's the domino effect. Right now, the backlash isn't uniform, it's fragmented, it's loud, it's emotional. But it signals something important. The audience that just arrived, the one driving the ratings surge, is watching closely. And they're not staying silent. Strip away the personalities, remove the viral clips, ignore the comment sections for a second. This comes down to money. The WNBA has reportedly operated at a financial loss for much of its existence. Estimates over the years have suggested annual deficits in the tens of millions. Whether those figures fluctuate season to season isn't the point. The league has never operated like the NFL or NBA in terms of revenue scale. And that's the part that complicates everything. Because when fans compare labor tactics to leagues like the NFL or NBA, they're comparing fundamentally different financial ecosystems. Those leagues generate billions annually. Revenue sharing disputes there involve massive profit pools. The WNBA is still building. Now, that doesn't mean players shouldn't push for a larger share. In fact, many analysts argue that growth moments are exactly when labor should negotiate aggressively. If attendance is up, if TV deals are expanding, if merchandise sales are climbing, that's leverage. But leverage only works if the pie is sustainable. Here, the reported gap. Ownership proposals allegedly included a rising salary cap over several years, with max salaries climbing into 7 figures long-term. The Players Association reportedly countered with significantly higher starting numbers and a larger percentage of gross revenue. That's not unusual in negotiations. Both sides typically begin far apart. The issue is pace. Can the league afford a dramatic jump immediately, or does growth need to scale over time? Supporters of the union argue that waiting risks locking in smaller percentages while the league's popularity surges. Critics argue that jumping too far too fast could destabilize a still fragile system. And here's the uncomfortable truth: both arguments have logic. Revenue sharing in major leagues often approaches 50%. In the WNBA, current structures are far below that, but those leagues didn't reach profitability overnight. They built over decades. That's why timing matters so much. If the league is indeed still operating near break-even or at a loss, then owners will resist dramatic increases that outpace revenue growth. If players believe revenue projections are about to spike due to expansion, new TV contracts, and rising sponsorship, they'll push harder now. This isn't greed versus fairness. It's risk tolerance versus urgency. Another factor rarely discussed publicly is long-term sustainability. If salary caps surge too quickly and revenue underperforms projections, ownership could pull back investment. If increases are too slow, players could feel exploited during a growth window. That balance is razor-thin. And that's why public strike language feels explosive in this context. A work stoppage in a league still fighting for consistent mainstream footing could slow momentum significantly. But from a labor perspective, sometimes the threat of disruption is the only real pressure tool available. So the real financial question isn't emotional. It's mathematical. How much revenue is truly sustainable? How fast can it scale? And how much risk is each side willing to absorb? Because the financial reality isn't about who deserves more. It's about whether the league's foundation is strong enough to support the leap everyone wants it to take. This is the scenario nobody wants to say out loud. What happens if the 2026 season doesn't start on time? Right now, the WNBA is negotiating what could be the most important collective bargaining agreement in its history. Tensions are visible. Strike talk has entered the conversation. Public narratives are clashing. So while nothing has officially broken down, the possibility of a delay, even a short one, can't be ignored. And if that happens, the consequences ripple fast. First, momentum. The league is coming off record spikes in attendance, ratings, and engagement. Expansion teams are on the way. Broadcast partners are investing more attention. Casual fans are finally tuning in consistently. A delayed season interrupts that rhythm immediately. Sports fans are creatures of habit. If games aren't there when expected, attention shifts elsewhere. The NBA playoffs, MLB season, NFL off-season coverage. Once a new audience drifts, bringing them back isn't automatic. Second, television contracts. Broadcast deals depend on inventory. Networks pay for scheduled games. If those games disappear or shrink, renegotiations can happen. That doesn't mean contracts collapse overnight, but uncertainty isn't something media partners love. Stability attracts investment. Instability raises caution. Third, player impact. A delay doesn't just hurt owners, it affects athletes across the board. Star players might weather it financially through endorsements, But rotation players, rookies, and minimum contract athletes rely heavily on seasonal income. A prolonged disruption creates uneven pressure inside the union itself. Fourth, public narrative. Right now, the league's story is growth. A work stoppage flips that headline to conflict. Instead of expansion and record numbers, media coverage centers on division and uncertainty. That shift matters when you're still building mainstream credibility. Now, to be fair, labor disputes in sports aren't unprecedented. The NBA had lockouts. The NFL had strikes. Those leagues survived, even thrived afterward. But context matters. Those leagues were already financial giants when they disrupted their seasons. The WNBA is in a growth phase, not an established dominance phase. The margin for error is smaller. There's also the human side. Younger players entering the league expect opportunity. Expansion cities are preparing for debut seasons. Sponsors are planning campaigns. Delays don't just pause games, they pause confidence. And confidence is fragile in emerging markets. Now here's the key question. Would a delay permanently damage the league? Probably not permanently. But could it slow momentum significantly? Absolutely. That's why this moment feels so high stakes. Both sides believe they're protecting the league's future. Owners want sustainability. Players want fair participation in growth. But if the negotiation escalates into disruption, both risk losing short-term traction. The irony. Everyone claims to want the same thing, a stronger league. The path to get there is where the conflict lies. And if 2026 opens late, or not at all, the cost won't just be financial. It will be momentum. Here's the question that cuts through all the noise. Is this moment about leverage or legacy? Because those are two very different mindsets. Leverage says strike while the iron is hot. Attendance is up. Ratings are climbing. Expansion is happening. If you believe the league is entering a new financial tier, you push now. You demand a larger percentage. You force ownership to recognize the growth immediately. Legacy says something else. Legacy says protect the momentum. Build slowly but securely. Lock in sustainable increases. Make sure the 2026 season happens without chaos. Preserve public trust while the league cements its place in mainstream sports culture. Right now, those philosophies are colliding inside the WNBA. Some players believe this is the rare window where power shifts toward labor. Others believe pushing too hard risks damaging the fragile surge the league is experiencing. And hovering above all of it is the reality that this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about perception. Sponsors, networks, expansion cities. Casual fans, they're all watching how this unfolds. If negotiations end with a deal that rewards players and keeps momentum intact, this era will be remembered as the turning point, the moment women's professional basketball stepped into a stronger financial future. But if talks collapse into delay, division, or a prolonged standoff, history may frame it differently, not as a bold stand, but as a gamble taken too soon. That's why this feels bigger than a typical labor dispute. The next agreement won't just determine salaries. It will shape how the league is remembered 5, 10, even 20 years from now. Was this the moment players secured their rightful share of growth? Or the moment momentum fractured under pressure? Leverage can win battles. Legacy decides how those battles are remembered.